Riccio, professor in comparative media studies. And I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Emily Rueb, who is a reporter for the New York Times. She's also where she writes and produces New York 101, a multimedia series that really is about infrastructure in New York. And I'm intrigued by it because it's about system, and I'm intrigued by her use of media as a system to get her storytelling apart. Emily is currently a Nieman Fellow. She's a recipient of the Emmy as well as the Knight Batten Award for Innovation in Journalism. And tonight we're here to talk about innovation in story form. We know that newspaper readerships in general are declining a bit, especially take up among young people is not what it could be, perhaps ought to be. And we know, on the other hand, that the media forms that young folks are using tend to be highly interactive. And there are a few pioneers out there pushing forward within legacy organizations. And the Times, the Guardian, Die Zeit, Digital would be examples of newspapers that are kind of trying to find, experiment, explore new ways of doing it. And Emily is one of those pioneers, one of those explorers. So we're here to hear about her work tonight.
Canary.
And a couple of things to say. One, you might know the Hawk Cam. And behind me is the person that brought that to life back in 2011. But it's in kind of precarious shape now because of the state of Flash. So the preservation of these innovations is a real issue. We've been looking at it in the Open Doc Lab a lot. It's a problem, and I hope we hear a little bit about that. What do we do with print? Has the great fortune of being stable. What do we do with some of these interactive environments where stability cannot be taken for granted? We're also looking at a moment of a medium in transition, I'm fairly convinced, and so we're watching that process play out. I want to also point out that the Q&A will be off the record tonight, so your questions can be particularly sharp if you'd like them to be so.
Great.
Emily, welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me. So I am a reporter at the New York Times. I've been at the company for 11 years. I started right after high school. That's a joke. That's a joke, joke. But in that time, I've just seen a tremendous amount of change in the way that we tell stories, in the way that we reach our readers. So, in the olden days, this was our product, and we knew how to do it. The Times knew how to do it. We, fired up the presses, we gassed up the trucks, sent them off, flung it at people's doorsteps, and once it got there, and once it got to newsstands, that we had done our job. 1996, website appeared. And that created a lot of tension in the newsroom, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we have, in the 2000s, does anyone know what this device is? Things got a little bit more complicated in the 2000s, and now today we are swimming in media channels, WhatsApp and text and phones and Alexa and so all of these ways that we used to be able to just tell one story and then write it in the page and print it up, and now all of that has that model has kind of exploded, so to speak. So just a little bit about me. I got my start in journalism in Paris, and I worked for publications like Time Out in Paris, but I also dabbled in radio and television. I lived in Scotland for a while, worked at the BBC, and then also had more experience at the Financial Times in London, where I really, felt like I committed to newspapers and magazines. And so I felt like, print was sort of my medium, but I also, wasn't wedded to it and felt like, there were other avenues to explore, which I will talk about in a minute. But I was hired in 2006, and back then, the building it's now the Yahoo building, but it was 229 West 43rd Street was, this big hulking building. There were beautiful brass doors, and I was ready to go to work there, but actually this is where I showed up to work. This is 507th Avenue, which is where the website was. So the website, we were an electronic media company. We had a separate work contract, we had a separate newsroom, we had a separate org chart, we worked in separate systems, and we were down the street. So we would walk back and forth between, in Times Square. Times Square is named Times Square because of the New York Times. We would sort of see other web people sort of walking back and forth in the rain to like go to meetings at the paper. So we were, kind of treated like we were on the JV team, okay? But that also meant a lot of opportunities because print people were not really paying attention to what we were doing. And so, there were days, things had gotten better by the time I arrived, but there were even editors that didn't want web people at their meetings because they didn't want to be scooped by the website. So that's this is just a part of the history of the Times. Obviously, things are changing. But I started in travel, and I was doing a lot of multimedia. Again, as William pointed out, like most of my audio slideshows. Does anyone know what an audio slideshow is? That was like the coin of the realm back then, and before Mark Bittman was like a thing, I would lock him in a closet and like get good tape and do audio slideshows with him and Frank Bruni, experimented with sort of new forms of storytelling, trying to liven things up a little bit. So it was up to us really to think about when the print editors had like a big package, it was up to us to kind of figure out how to translate that, like the 53 places to go. But we also made up stuff, and I started experimenting with audience engagement. So this was the Frugal Traveler. We sent him off with a GPS device. This is, I know it sounds totally ridiculous. What year is this? 2008 or 9. And then, every night we would like upload his like data for the day, and we hacked together like this Google map. And we would, he would alter his route depending on where readers wanted him to go. And so this is, this new form of this two-way interaction where we're actually, listening to our readers and trying to, incorporate, what they had to say and let them into our reporting. So we also redesigned this is all dead now, by the way. This totally doesn't exist anywhere, but we redesigned the travel website, and this was also another instance where there's a separation between church and state, editorial and business do not mix at the Times, but this was an instance where we were really trying to build out these destination pages, and we partnered, with Expedia to put on a booking module, and we were also building out these pages to engage readers and ask for their insights about where to go, where to, stay, what to eat. But that caused a tremendous amount of tension in the newsroom because it was one of the first projects of its kind where we were actually really trying to monetize our content. So in 2008, I joined the Metro desk. Does anyone know what City Room is? So this is the heyday of blogs, okay? The blogs at one point, like the Times had about 80 of them. And City Room was one of the, I would say one of the highest, it had one of the highest metabolisms. We were like producing 20 items a day. And we, had a small team. I was the producer. We had, a few reporters and editors, and we were really experimenting. Our mission really was to promote civic engagement and to, really try to. There was a mission statement that said to enhance and supplement Metro articles from the Times, offer non-news features about the history and civic culture of the city, and encourage reader comments and discussion. So that was our mission statement, and we went to town. And the great thing about our little world was that, kind of like when I was on travel, people were paying attention to what we were doing, but there wasn't a lot of bureaucracy around. We didn't have to go very far to just get permission to do things. So we had a lot of latitude, which was incredible because we were able to do things that were not very Timesian, right? Because the Times has a very, we have a reputation and to uphold certain standards, and we do want to do that. But I think that what City Room did was, offer a little bit more fun. So, and we did a lot of series. My job was to really create series and regular features that would draw readers back to the site and to encourage their participation and create that habit. Like every week I would, ask somebody like a window washer or a train operator or a politician to come in and ask questions. And another part of my job was to, really help print editors rethink what a traditional story was, right? Because print editors know how to write that 800-word story, right? It's like, and does anyone know what a voices piece is? So in newspaper parlance, the shorthand is like, yeah, we need a voices piece on that, which is literally a reporter going out and taking the temperature of people about, opinions about a new legislation or a politician or an event. And so this was actually a real voices piece, and these were, we were able to sort of create this tableau of voices, literally, but you could actually connect with the emotion in people's voices, and also sort of spatially, see where people are, and it just, it was offering a new way to present stories to our readers. Now, here is one of my favorite projects. So I have been spending a lot of time, or have always spent a lot of time, thinking about, what I could do to engage readers, right? What, and how do I reach audiences? Now, I am not a bird watcher, but my mom is, and I would go on long walks with my brother, and I realized that bird watchers are very smart. They love data. They're very competitive. They love to share, and there are a lot of them. I think, bird watching might have even surpassed gardening as America's most, number one pastime in America, or a hobby. So, and also if you look at the Venn diagram of the Times reader and the bird watcher, there is a lot of overlap. So I started going around the building saying, hey everybody, I'm doing this thing called Bird Week, like Shark Week, but for birds. And I wasn't really getting the reaction that I was hoping for. I had a lot of editors who said, two in particular, who said, you really should not be wasting your time on Bird Week. And I said, thanks. Okay, great. So I went ahead and I called up the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I called up New York City Audubon. I found, people within the building who were excited about birds. My friend David Dunlap, who I'll tell you about in a minute. And I went ahead and just started calling meetings, putting meetings on people's calendars about Bird Week. I commissioned Mike Tyson to write a defense of the pigeon. He said, make a pigeon your friend and you will never be lonely. It was beautiful. It is a beautiful essay. went on WNYC, and we partnered with this company called Mobile Commons, and we started, asking people where they go bird watching. And then my friend David Dunlap tipped me off. So this is David Dunlap is, horn rim glasses. He wears a bow tie every day to work. I sat next to him. He's in his 60s. Very seasoned reporter. And I said, David, nobody is interested in Bird Week. And he said to me, over his horn rim glasses, he said, fuck 'em. And then he told me about this pair of red-tailed hawks that were nesting outside of NYU's president's office in Washington Square Park. I think that's Bobby on the left and Violet on the right. So there had been NYU professors who had already named the hawks. So I ran down to the office. Of course, I called them first. And I think they rued the day that they let me in their office. But I went down there, and this is actually the second iteration of the Hawk Cam, because the first one was really, I knew we had a live stream account that nobody was really using, and I rummaged around in the supply closet for a Logitech, one of those crappy little webcams, and I taped it to the curtains, and then just plugged it into the live stream account and then just started broadcasting. I sent a message to Andy Newman, who was the bureau chief. I was like, is this even cool? And he was like, oh my God, yeah, we have to go live. So as soon as, I started, broadcasting this thing, I realized I had created a lot of problems for myself because this was a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week stream, okay? We couldn't interview our subjects, but the bigger problem was that nothing was happening. So there was this bird, this hawk sitting on the nest. Every once in a while she would get up and, turn the eggs around, and I was starting to take a lot of heat, from my editors. Okay, but what's the point of this whole thing? Bill Keller, who was former executive editor of the New York Times, who was then an opinion writer, mentioned it in reference to a Yule log. And so, so I was like, all right, we gotta do something about this. So, we hosted the Q&As, with ornithologists and this woman, Marie Wynn, who had chronicled this other famous red-tailed hawk. We did, shoe leather reporting. But here was the cool part so this is the old live stream. There's nobody in the nest right there. But there was a chat room that was bananas. There were people named Pip Chick, Pond Dove, and these became our sources because we started, they were the ones who started tipping us off, to events that were happening in the nest. Then there was a raptor expert from Ohio, John Blakeman, who started, responding to some of these questions because people were like, why doesn't, the father hawk ever sleep on the nest, and so, people were starting to criticize, sort of their, bedroom habits. And so we had these, another urban hawk expert chime in and, reassure people that's normal behavior. So it was really, these people who were making this story. They started making it their own. So they sent us photos of their animals. And of course, because, the key to reader engagement is to reward your readers, right? You can't, if you ask them to submit something, you want to acknowledge, their contribution. So we made a whole slideshow of pets watching the Hawk Cam. And then things just, blossomed off of the site. This was something I just couldn't control. They were making Twitter accounts. There was this woman who was housebound in North Carolina, who, was so inspired by this and was connecting with these other, readers. She wrote all these letters and made these beautiful illustrations. This was, helping people transcend their everyday lives. And also, but they were making it their own. I mean, this is like the definition of viral content, right? It's like these are memes, This is people are connecting with the content, they're putting their own little spin on it, and then they're sending it back out into the internet. So of course there was sort of the happy ending, and this is like a tiny little baby hawk, and baby hawks are very cute, but it was, it ended up being this phenomenon. In the first season, it ran for 4 seasons. The first season, I think people spent 150 million minutes watching this, an average of 16 minutes a person. Some might say that was those were hours of lost productivity, but I prefer to call that engagement. There were teachers who were watching with their students. There were ornithologists who were, observing these birds up close in this urban environment, that they wouldn't normally get to see, because normally, usually when they encounter them, they're under duress or they're hurt or something. And so this was a chance for them to study these birds, while they were going about their daily business. And it also just, inspired people to be in awe of their environment. And then they started to connect with each other in real life. So if you can see, they've got their name tags on. So these are their chat room handles. So it was, just there's so many lessons of the Hawk Cam, about believing in your own ideas and just going with your gut instinct and not listening to naysayers. But also that this was the technology was so simple that it really, when you're thinking about, creative and immersive storytelling, you don't have to have expensive gear. It's really about creating content that readers connect to emotionally. So we created this, sort of teed up this story, and then readers sort of made it their own experience. So there are pitfalls, however, of reader-generated content. So readers are a terrific resource. However, they're not always perfect. So this is in 2013. We were covering the mayor's race, and I always instead of covering the panel discussions or the debates, I wanted to create something that celebrated or recognized that the people every day who are little heroes on their block and their community, as a way to engage with New Yorkers, but also ask readers, who is meaningful to you. So we put out this call, and we got 200 very thoughtful responses, and we went through all of them. Most of the responses, however, were of people nominating their mom, which is nice, but not everyone's mom is a hero. This guy nominated himself 20 times, and so while readers are a really great resource, it really you still have to. We still had to do a lot of our own reporting to vet the entries, but also to make this project a success. So we did the oldie-timey print presentation, but then we also created these little video vignettes, and I worked with 2 incredible photographers to really just capture the essence of some of these characters. And this is Gina Sakala, She has been sitting outside of her stoop on Spring Street since John Gotti, wandered the neighborhood. Do we know who John Gotti is? Mobster guy who would give the kids ice cream and stuff like that. So, and she's a relic of this.
I was born and raised in
Can you
this
hear that?
building 82 years ago. I'm sitting outside about 60 years with me and my family and friends of ours. Everybody passes. Hello, Gina. Good morning, Gina. No, I put her in the jar now.
That's Edna,
Edna's my best friend. We're up together.
the comptroller.
We've always been together.
So the point of that is that they're, experimenting with the audio and video, and you can really, you can read about Gina, and I can quote what she says on the page, but she's someone you really want to hear from. So another project that I worked on was every couple of years, the Times, and many news organizations, talk about the noise in the city and how it is a constant problem. The challenge is making something like this visual. We tried several tactics to try and sort of connect readers to this invisible force, right? So we rented a dosimeter, which measures decibel levels, and created these little noise diaries where we followed around a handful of characters just to show the level of noise exposure that they received every day. It was interesting, but it was not like a big success. This, on the other hand, was much more powerful. So when I'm thinking about multimedia, I like to think about it as like zigging and zagging, right? You've got your print piece that is like, it's going to do the due diligence of like, it's really loud in New York City, and here are the experts who are going to tell you that. And then have the multimedia do something completely different. So for this, we just turned the idea on its head and asked people, where do you find peace and quiet in New York City? And worked with a developer to map a lot of these submissions. So we got about 800 submissions. And then I went out with a photographer and an audio recorder. And we, again, rewarding readers, we decided to create these audio-visual postcards, like a moment of zen. So trying to create sort of this immersive experience where, if you're at your, desk at lunch, sit back, put on your headphones, and you can't hear it, but there's like birds chirping, and we're at this beautiful, garden in Staten Island. We went on the Staten Island ferry, and so again, we were trying to create this immersive experience, but working with readers and also rewarding them again for their contributions by adding, a pull quote and creating this, this display. So it was also a really fun project to report, because for like 4 days, I just drove all around Manhattan with an audio recorder and just went into some of the most incredible, beautiful places. So my latest project, New York 101, is, as William said, it's about infrastructure, but as journalists, I feel a strong duty to educate. And so a big part of this series is making people more aware of their surroundings, but also creating ways into difficult and complex systems. That's the hardest part about infrastructure, is that it's everywhere, and it is really hard to find a way in, because it's just hard to know where to start. And so, I worked with an editor, Mike Luo, who's now at the New Yorker, but it was his idea to say, to cover infrastructure, but it's like, okay, well, but what does that mean? And so, as you'll see, it kind of went all over the place in how I was trying to establish this beat, but my goal ultimately was like making infrastructure talk. So here was one of the first. I worked with Delta. So airports and airlines are amazing sources of data. Because everything is recorded, and so there's a lot of, if you're data nerds, so many cool data sets in there. But I worked with them to, help break down the process of like what happens when a plane touches down at JFK, one of the busiest airports, in North America, from the time it touches down to the time it takes off, because Delta doesn't make any money when the planes are on the ground, so they know every, down to the second where their plane is and where their mechanics are. And so I, worked with them to, detail the number of pounds of jet fuel that were loaded into the plane, how many cans of tomato juice went into it. And so, taking sort of this behind the scenes look at what goes on at airports. And I don't have it here, and I used GIFs, because who doesn't like a GIF? I also, wrote about people. A big part of the series is also highlighting the people who were, work behind the scenes. This is Sal Magaddino. He's like a former major crimes detective at the NYPD. And he is standing on this giant book sorter. Okay, so he runs this department called Book Ops, like book operations, Book Ops. So he works with former military guys who are like logistics experts from Iraq, and have deployed platoons, and now they're they got this, again, they know where all their books are, and they were like, if a patron has an urgent request, we could reroute that truck. So they took me behind the scenes to their headquarters, and showed me all of the maps, and their service routes and everything. And so I worked with them. Again, I knew that they had this great data set. I wrote a story about about Sal and this book sorting competition that they have every year with the Seattle Public Library. So there was a news peg there. But the more fun part was actually tracking a book. I checked out Breakfast at Tiffany's and send it to Staten Island, and they were able, so they knew that I was doing this, and they were able to give me the actual timestamps of when and where it went through the system, and when it went on that book sorter that we just saw, as a way to actually show people when you check out your book, that book, and there have been a lot of people who have made that happen. I also wrote about an archaeologist for hire, and but instead of I wrote about her work, but I also, as a sidebar, I thought it would be cool to do a deep dive of one building that has sort of been at the crossroads of cultural, political change, for centuries, right? Beginning with the Bull's Head Tavern, where George Washington, rallied his troops, and it was this German beer hall. It was a Yiddish vaudeville theater. So, tracing the evolution and working with archivists at New York Times has an amazing archivist, Jeff Roth, who is an archiving god. Those are not my words. somebody else called him an archiving god, and tracked down, old building records. I worked with the Municipal Archives to really, sort of take readers through the history of New York City through this one building. This was a breakthrough for the series, and it was, it was timely because Flint. There were issues. People in Flint, Michigan, were, drinking out of bottled water. They were, bathing in bottled water because the city had switched the source of their water, and they hadn't adequately tested it. So I wanted to write something that wasn't alarmist. And I also wanted to write something that was going to last beyond the headlines and have some staying power, because, that's something that, our news organization is getting better at. But, there is like an impulse to like write that day's story and just to get it in the paper, right? Whereas this, I wanted it to be, like an investigation, but a contextual investigation that would help people sort of think and perhaps even appreciate the work that goes into delivering their water every day. So, I went through a lot of boring reports. I also did a Snapchat story. Does anyone use Snapchat here? I'll say some Snapchat. A little bit. So I used Snapchat, and I went, to the Catskills and traced, the water's journey, all the way to a tap in, where I literally, turned on a tap in Manhattan. And it was, it was a way to reach another audience, but it was also, it informed my reporting. And so I, had at that point was able to sort of break down this is my own little drawings. I was able to sort of create sort of a not a mock-up, but just some kind of proof of concept that I brought to a designer. And, it turns out, his very, very talented designer, Matt Ruby, and it turns out that he had this idea, or had this idea of creating a new story format that wasn't a vertical scroll, that was horizontal, and that readers could flip through. And so, we worked together in a Google Doc, which is, for the sake of transparency, I mean, a lot of reporters are resistant to that idea because, you're showing somebody your raw copy. And so there's, people get kind of nervous about that, but I just sort of threw it all in there, and my first draft was about 4,000 words, and then he told me if we do it this way, each panel would have to be about 200 to 400 words. So that was the real work, was really narrowing it down and really refining it and simplifying it, but without losing accuracy. And I think that in the end, it was really powerful because it had fewer words. And so, that story just gained a lot of attention because it really made people think differently, or it presented a new option for editors, right, who are sort of storyboarding some of their ideas. I investigated the roads, and again went through a similar process, thinking maybe I'll just answer a bunch of questions, but I ended up just answering one simple question. And as you'll see, I tried to, I worked with Grant Gold, who was like a really talented designer, and we used. Okay, good. We tried to break up the text with headlines, with illustrations that are not quite graphics, but that are doing some of the work, that are telegraphing information, but that are also pleasing. And so, we played with, using sort of these pull quotes just to help people find sort of ways in. So even if you just wanted to sort of scan it, you could just, there were lots of chunky blocks of text that would offer, a little bit of variety because it's, it's road construction. I mean, how interesting is that? Turns out very interesting. So, but you can read all about it. So then, one of the hardest pieces was the power grid. How often do you think about your electricity bill? What do you have, Con Ed here? No, National Grid. And Eversource. How often do you think about your source of electricity?
A lot.
Oh, a lot?
It goes out a lot.
Oh, it goes out a lot. All right, well, case in point. Infrastructure is a bit like love. You just don't know what you've got until it's gone. So we worked really hard to really just pare this down. Again, I got to work with Matt Ruby, and the goal was really just making something, using very short, simple sentences. Oh, these drawings are not very clear, but just trying to really break down the process in a way that didn't use flowery language, that unspooled the concepts very, very simply. And I worked with many experts who read behind me, including my dad, who worked for the Department of Energy for a while and has worked in engineering, just to make sure that this was accessible. And we got a great reader response that, of people. One guy said, he's never gonna think about, flipping on the light switch in the morning the same way again. And that to me is a win. But also, professors said they were using it in their curriculum, but it was an exercise in restraint. And this package really was about simplifying, and a lot of these stories are really about simplifying. So what's next? I'm just going to show you a few more examples, and then I'll open it for questions. Has anyone seen the 360 videos? This was cool because I got to go escort the Queen Mary out of New York Harbor with the harbor pilots. The Times, I guess, is one of the only, or one of the first to, really dive into 360 video, and it's really cool because it brings readers to a place that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, like the cockpit of this of the Queen Mary, and then also climbing down the ladder, while another ship is sort of running alongside of it. So taking readers and giving them this sort of incredible experience, but also giving them control of their frame, because you can drag the cursor and you can actually choose your own. So this is participatory. You are letting readers sort of, navigate their way in the story. Now, the Times partnered with Samsung, and we've had one of these a day, and so which we can talk about. It has pluses and minuses of introducing a new technology into the newsroom, which really dictates, a demand for the story. So, I have mixed feelings about that. Happy to talk about that. Has anyone seen the AR stuff? It's really cool. The mobile phone is like the platform du jour. So this is the Times' augmented reality, one of their first, which essentially brought these Olympians into your living room. So whereas 360 video takes you somewhere that you wouldn't normally go, AR actually meets you where you are and brings this experience to you. So, this is, if you have even a semi-recent iPhone, you can actually get this experience on your phone. You can just hold it up, and this ice skater, I'm forgetting his name, Chen, will appear in your living room. And then, or David Bowie. This was the second one. And they're really working. I talked to Graham Roberts, who's like running this new department. And he said something I liked about thinking about the phone, right? It's like we used to think about it as like this, like a surface, right? And now they're thinking about it like a window, which actually I just really liked, because so they used photogrammetry to take these very detailed pictures of the costumes that were going to be on display at the Brooklyn Museum, and interspersed it with text. So they're really trying to, create this augmented reality experience in the context of the story. So you don't have to like click away, and your experience of reading the story is interrupted. And this is the last example. Does anyone read the Metropolitan Diary? Yay, Metropolitan Diary. So this is the Times' longest running user-generated column. It started in 1976 as a mailbag. And in 2011, there were editors who were, again, not that enthusiastic about it, because it's time intensive. People write in these stories. These are readers' stories about moments that they overheard, or like an interaction with the cab driver, or like a missed connection, or just like these are heartwarming stories. There's poetry, a lot of bad poetry, and so. In 2011 or 2012, I can't remember, I just realized that there was a huge opportunity here. And so I dragged it out and started producing it in another way, so that each diary entry stood alone. We started adding metadata to it, and then, giving readers an actual byline, which is a big deal. In the olden days, when the column started, if your submission was accepted, the Times would send you a bottle of champagne. We don't do that anymore. So now you get the byline and sort of an entree into this sort of prestigious, this canon of New York history, and then allowed people to comment on it. So then I decided to take it one step further, which was like AR 1.0. And a friend of mine at work, Chris Wiggins, who's the chief data scientist, connected me with Matt Condon, who is a super talented developer, who created an app, because I thought, well, wouldn't it be kind of cool if, we were to create an app, that surfaced, or allowed people to search for all of these different diary entries. And to have them all in one place, and you could search for stories that are like related to dogs, or or that were just poems. Well, or what if you were to have on your phone this app, and it would know where you are. Now again, there's some privacy issues here, of course, but it was location aware, and it surfaced a diary entry that was near to you. And so
on your phone, you can read it, share it.
So this is, I'll just turn off the sound, but this was essentially the way it worked. Now this is not ever going to be a product. This is not like, it's too niche, but it does sort of, really interest me because I'm very curious about what's next about location aware storytelling. There's a incredible opportunity here to interact and also present information, and that's what mostly excites me about AR is this idea of like layering information. And the Times has this like incredible archive, photos of articles, and I'm just imagining holding your phone up, and if I could do that 50 Bowery story about that one building in New York City, you could hold up your phone and you could sort of see the history right then and there. you know, it's, you know, there are a lot of opportunities to be, you know, to discuss, you know, that Times has this incredible body of knowledge, you know, in terms of restaurant reviews and in terms of its, you know, expertise in climate science. And so it's really exciting to think about, you know, what the Times will be doing next. And, you know, there's a lot of thoughtful discussion about how technology can be used to, you know, enrich people's lives with information. And that is like, that's where I see sort of AR and like my job or whatever I do next is to, you know, and also to create this collaborative and this iterative process to make the news.